My dear friend, as we sit together tonight, I wish to speak of a subtle tension that exists in the fabric of human life, the fear that society holds toward those who think for themselves. There is a quiet unease in communities, in institutions, and in cultures when an individual dares to pause, to question, to perceive beyond the habitual flow of thought. This is not merely a social reaction, it is a mirror reflecting our collective insecurity. For to think independently is to reveal that much of what we accept without question is fragile, unexamined, and often assumed. To think for oneself requires courage. It requires the willingness to sit with uncertainty, to confront contradiction, and to resist the familiar pull of conformity. Most systems, be they educational, political, religious, or familial, function on the principle of repetition. Norms, rules, and expectations are established not always for the sake of truth, but for the sake of stability, predictability, and control. And here comes the individual who pauses and asks quietly, is this true? Is this right? Does this align with what I perceive? The reaction is often swift, though subtle. Such thinkers are labeled skeptics, dreamers, rebels, or troublemakers. Their inquiries unsettle those who are comfortable with accepted truths. A question, after all, is a small disruption, and disruption challenges the equilibrium that society strives to maintain. We fear the unknown, and independent thought is an encounter with the unknown, beginning first within the mind of the thinker and radiating outward. I recall a story, quietly remembered from my own wanderings. In a town bound by rigid tradition, there lived a young scholar named Elian. From early years, he noticed that many of the teachings around him were accepted blindly. He did not rebel with anger, nor did he challenge with force, he questioned quietly, observing patterns, reflecting upon meanings, seeking clarity. And yet, the elders grew wary of him. They feared the subtle changes his thoughts might provoke in the hearts of others. When one mind begins to wander freely, it inevitably illuminates shadows, and shadows make people uneasy. Elian continued nonetheless. He pursued wisdom through observation and reflection. He read texts long forgotten, conversed with those willing to listen, and sought understanding beyond dogma. Over time, his ideas began to ripple outward, not through confrontation, but through subtle insight. The villagers, initially fearful, began to reconsider, slowly, the truths they had accepted unquestioningly. And in this quiet shift, the power of independent thought revealed itself. It did not demand obedience, it simply invited reflection. Society fears independent thinkers because they reveal gaps between perception and reality, between habit and understanding, between authority and truth. When one person dares to question, it exposes the fragility of assumptions that others have relied upon without scrutiny. There is a discomfort in realizing that many decisions, beliefs, and structures are maintained by convenience or fear rather than insight. Independent thought is a mirror, and mirrors often reflect truths we would rather ignore. Yet, this fear is also a sign of the immense potential carried by independent thinkers. Every movement toward progress, every innovation, every philosophical revolution has begun with someone willing to think differently. Galileo questioned the heavens, Socrates questioned the nature of life, countless others have challenged norms quietly or boldly, and their courage reshaped human understanding. To think for oneself is not merely a personal act, it is a gift to the collective consciousness, a spark that illuminates hidden truths and expands the horizon of possibility. There is also a quiet resilience that grows in those who think independently. They learn to navigate misunderstanding, criticism, and sometimes isolation. They must trust their own observations, cultivate inner guidance, and differentiate between wisdom and conformity. Over time, this cultivates clarity, discernment, and a calm courage that few experience when living solely within the approval of others. Independent thought is both lonely and liberating. It asks for solitude, yet rewards the thinker with insight and freedom. Another aspect to consider is the subtle influence independent thinkers have without even trying. Often, society fears them not because of loud proclamations, but because of the quiet presence of self-assured clarity. A person who lives by reason and reflection, who examines life thoughtfully, who acts from understanding rather than habit, naturally inspires reconsideration in others. Their influence is not coercive, it is contagious, like the calm ripple of water across a still pond. I have observed, time and again, that independent thinkers also cultivate a profound relationship with uncertainty. Whereas most minds fear ambiguity and resist the unknown, Those who think for themselves learn to sit comfortably with questions that have no immediate answers. They understand that life is not always reducible to rules or norms, that truth often emerges gradually, and that wisdom requires patience. In this space, they become explorers of reality, navigating complexity with curiosity and attentiveness. Consider this: society often equates conformity with stability and obedience with peace. Yet, real growth, intellectual, spiritual, and emotional, requires questioning. Independent thinkers are catalysts, and catalysts, by nature, disturb equilibrium. This disturbance is often mistaken for danger, even when it is a quiet force of awakening. Fear arises not from their intentions, but from the implications of their awareness, that if one mind can think freely, others may follow, and the unquestioned foundations may tremble. And yet, to think for oneself is also a deeply human act of courage and honesty. It is an acknowledgement that one cannot surrender consciousness entirely to external authority. It is a commitment to discernment, reflection, and alignment with truth as one perceives it. Those who walk this path may encounter resistance, isolation, or misunderstanding, but they also discover a freedom and clarity that few others experience. They learn that their worth is not contingent upon approval, and that their voice, even if quiet, carries meaning. There is a subtle poetry in this journey. To think independently is to move with care through a world often ruled by expectation. It is to cultivate observation, reflection, and discernment as daily practice. It is to confront discomfort, challenge assumptions, and embrace the uncertainty of insight. And it is in this disciplined, patient, and attentive engagement with life that the soul of the independent thinker thrives. And as we continue, we notice another dimension: independent thinkers are often feared because they reflect possibilities that society may not yet be ready to embrace. Their clarity, their courage, their insight acts like a quiet mirror, showing others the limitations of unquestioned tradition, the fragility of assumptions, and the faint outlines of unacknowledged truths. This reflection can provoke discomfort, defensiveness, or even hostility, for it forces people to confront their own unexamined lives. Consider a subtle observation: when one person refuses to simply follow, to echo the established narrative, they become a reminder of freedom, freedom of mind, freedom of choice, freedom of perception. And freedom, even in small doses, can feel dangerous to systems built upon control. For independent thought is contagious. Once a mind begins to question, others may awaken to the same possibilities, and the carefully constructed patterns of obedience begin to shift. I once knew a woman named Celine, a teacher in a quiet town. She had a habit of encouraging her students to ask questions, to explore ideas beyond the textbooks, to consider perspectives that challenged the standard narratives. Parents whispered, worried that she was too radical, that her influence might destabilize what they called normal. But Celine persisted. She knew that when minds are guided toward independent thought, they do not merely absorb knowledge, they awaken to understanding. And understanding, though sometimes unsettling, is the first step toward growth. Independent thinkers, my friend, live with an inner discipline. They must. To see clearly in a world that prefers routine and repetition, to question quietly in a society that celebrates compliance, requires patience, attentiveness, and courage. They cultivate awareness of their own minds, observation of the world, and discernment in their actions. This inner cultivation often makes them appear different, unusual, or even aloof. Yet it is precisely this depth that makes them capable of profound insight, creativity, and contribution. There is also a paradoxical grace in independent thought. While it can unsettle society, it also invites growth. Every challenge posed by a thoughtful, questioning individual is an opportunity for reflection. Every uncomfortable insight can open the door to clarity, empathy, and wisdom. And yet, for those who are unaccustomed to being questioned, the initial reaction is fear, suspicion, or resistance. This is natural. Conformity is comforting. Certainty is safe. Independent thought, by contrast, is unfamiliar, and unfamiliarity often triggers anxiety. Let me share a small story, a quiet parable. In a small village by a winding river, there lived a man named Kiran. Kiran noticed patterns that others ignored: the way crops responded to subtle shifts in weather, the way the elders repeated old customs without understanding, the small injustices that were overlooked because they were tradition. He began to think, quietly, to question, to imagine alternatives. At first, the villagers ignored him. Then they whispered. Then they grew uneasy. His questions were not loud, but they were persistent. And in their persistence, they revealed something essential, that truth is not always aligned with expectation, and that independent thinking, even in its quietest form, has the power to awaken awareness. Kieran did not seek approval. He did not act out of defiance. He acted out of attention, observation, and integrity. And eventually, some villagers began to notice subtle changes in themselves, small awakenings of understanding sparked by his presence. This is the subtle, almost invisible power of independent thought. It does not coerce, it does not command, it illuminates. And illumination can be feared precisely because it casts shadows where people had grown accustomed to darkness. Independent thinkers also cultivate a profound relationship with uncertainty. They do not demand absolute answers, nor do they fear ambiguity. Instead, they move gracefully in the space between knowing and not knowing. They observe, reflect, and allow insight to arise naturally. This patience is misunderstood as hesitation or indecision, but it is in fact a deep engagement with reality as it truly is, rather than as it is conveniently imagined. There is another layer to this. Independent thinkers are often feared because they resist conformity not out of arrogance, but out of integrity. They recognize when structures, rules, or traditions no longer serve truth or justice. They resist blind obedience, not for rebellion's sake, but for the sake of alignment with reality and conscience. And this resistance, though quiet, can ripple outward, unsettling norms, expectations, and assumptions. I wish to share one final reflection. A story to illustrate this power. A young scholar named Amaris lived in a city bound by rigid rules of tradition and thought. From early years, she observed the patterns around her and noticed contradictions, injustices, and unexamined beliefs. She began to think independently, to question, to explore. Her peers were cautious, the elders wary. But Amaris persisted. She cultivated knowledge, discernment, and subtle courage. Over time, her quiet integrity influenced those around her, not through force, but through example. People began to reconsider assumptions, to explore their own thoughts, to awaken to the possibilities they had long ignored. In this way, independent thought carries both risk and gift. It may provoke fear in others, invite criticism, and create distance. Yet it also carries illumination, awakening, and transformation. Those who think for themselves offer society a mirror, one that can reveal both limitation and potential. So, my friend, consider this carefully. To think independently is to embrace both solitude and courage. It is to navigate life with awareness, reflection, and integrity. It is to acknowledge fear, both within oneself and in others, and to act anyway, guided by reason and conscience. And though society may respond with suspicion or anxiety, the presence of an independent mind is a quiet force of awakening. A reminder that consciousness cannot be contained, tradition cannot be unquestioned forever, and truth, however softly perceived, is a light that endures.